Oh my gosh, this Hangout on air is live. Holy cow. I didn't know that we'd ever get this live. My apologies to both Rob and any of viewers who are chiming in here because we had some serious technical difficulties for like forever.
But now we're on. So I just updated the world. I told the world we started late, but we're here.
Yes. All right, well, welcome. And you are tuning in from a trip right now. So where are you touring at the moment for my viewers who maybe are less familiar with
I'm
your
always
travels?
on here, I guess. I am in Florida. I am at teaching this week at the Gander Mountain Academy north of Orlando, and we're doing broadcast classes. So we're using technology like this, except we've got 6 network locations around the country, and we've got certified instructors at the 5 other locations, and I'm running classes from the base here in Lake Mary and doing a full class today, and then tomorrow I've got another one. The counter ambush lectures are tomorrow.
Awesome. So you are staying crazy busy.
Busy as
Well, the reason that we had originally started this chat, for those who didn't catch the thread, is I had posted a video not too long ago featuring some sight picture theories. And one sight picture theory I happened to learn from some of your YouTube videos is no sight shooting. But you clarified for us that that's not the only sight method that you teach. So I was hoping to get your explanation of um, what's your mindset that you teach in your instruction for sight picture, both the no shoot and otherwise.
Okay, you there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, I lost you for a second. Kind of froze.
Oh, come on. Don't do this to me now, Google Plus.
So, yeah, so you here? I'm here. You there? We there? We live? What's going on?
Yep, we're totally still
Okay,
live
so, all right,
for
so you
now.
had
Knock
said
on wood.
that you had saw something somewhere on one of my videos, somewhere on the interwebs, that my point shooting was the term, and we certainly do teach sighted fire. I think sighted fire is primary which people should learn to control the gun if they're interested in defensive shooting. Starting point, but what I wanted to clarify, just to make sure everybody understood the whole program and what we do, is that we very quickly, after we teach the unsighted fire, and people are using their body athletically and intuitively, we have them do sighted fire. And it really, what's important is that obviously shooters know how to do both, but I think unsighted fire sets a much better baseline than sighted fire athletic use of a fire.
So it's one half of a holistic sight picture approach. Oh, did I lose you again?
It's the defensive shooting
Shoot.
quarter.
I don't know if it's just for my broadcast, but that audio just came in and out. So I didn't catch what you said. Would you repeat, please?
Yeah, so I was talking about the nature of defensive shooting lending itself towards obviously an athletic use of a firearm. And I think for a new shooter developing their skill, developing the unsighted fire, orienting the gun kinesthetically, getting the gun extended fully in parallel with your line of sight while focusing on the threat, establishes a better relationship between the shooter and the gun than starting out with sighted fire. Now, if we're going to use our sights, we could literally hold the gun upside down, pull the trigger with our pinky, and hold it behind us and use a mirror to line up the sights, and we could still hit the target. So there's no guarantee of a good relationship between the gun and the shooter if we start with sighted fire. If we start with unsighted fire, under a reasonable situation, 12 feet, 10 feet, a chest-sized target, we know that the student must be integrating with the gun at some level of consistency, and then we can add the sights in as a refinement of their deviation control.
I see. So one of the things that I had, or one of the reasons that I had sought out some of your videos was because I like the kind of pragmatic approach that you take to self-defense. Because there are a lot of, fads and gimmicks out there related to firearms training today. I'm just out of curiosity, what is the source of that approach that you take?
Originally, I think it was inspired by a frustration between in regard to the difference between the training environment and what was actually happening in defensive shootings and even in high-level reality-based training. So as a student of all these things through the 90s, starting in the 80s, but then going into the 90s, the advent of a couple of things. One, dash camera videos, and obviously surveillance camera videos becoming more common and higher quality. The dash camera videos showing us what law enforcement shootings look like. And also high-level reality-based training, simunitions, other non-lethal training ammunition, high-level scenario. All of that really came into its own in the 90s. And what we started to see was that the fights that were happening in front of these police cruisers and the fights that were happening in convenience stores and the simulated fights, the high-level reality-based simulated fights, looked nothing like the typical Weaver position, double tap kind of shooting that was going on in the training environment. So that disconnect, created a lot of questions for me. Why are we still doing this when this is what seems to be happening? And unfortunately, the old answer used to be, well, my training got me through my fight. And we know that the human brain, and so you do the research, right? We know the human brain doesn't form memories super well under critical incident stress. We know that in the aftermath of trauma, people tend to fill in the blanks with their expectations as much as anything else. So it became sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you stood in the Weaver position and shot double taps and then you went and got into a gunfight and survived, you credited your training with getting you through it. Except when we started seeing videos of actual fights, we never saw a Weaver position in double taps. We saw lowering center of gravity, full extension, isosceles type shooting positions, and people shooting rapid, consistent fire, usually much faster than they could control and much faster than they had trained to control. So it was that disconnect that caused the frustration, and then sort of a reverse engineering of, well, if this is what keeps happening in the fights, how do we take that as a starting point instead of what works best on the range? And to this day, we still continue to sort of befuddle people that don't understand why you wouldn't want to perform as well as you can on a range. Well, the answer to me is very simple and self-evident. The range isn't what we're training for. So I don't want to set somebody up to win an IDPA match. I want to set somebody up to win a gunfight. So no kidding, our techniques aren't going to win IDPA matches. And that really flies in the face of a lot of people who started the industry and in the early days of the industry who really proved, quote unquote, their efficacy through performance in competitions.
So your training style helps to prepare your students for real life kind of chaos. How do you introduce that same kind of chaos into your training to keep it unpredictable but still allow your students to learn?
The focus in that regard is on processing of information. One of the books that some of the people may have seen online, the counter ambush book and then the home study course and the DVD set, we talk a lot about counter ambush training. One of the most important aspects of what that means is that we in the real world, you don't get a briefing. You don't get a stage briefing that you're going to go past the door, the target to your left, target to your right, turn to the right and take 2 steps and there's another target. You don't get that in the real world, right? So we shouldn't be running drills on the range that are basically free throws or choreographed, predictable, and in fact not only predictable but really directed drills where we tell a student, okay, you're going to shoot 2 shots into the A box and 1 shot into the B box and 3 shots into the head on the buzzer. Are you ready? Stand by. Buzz. What the brain does there is it of course starts rehearsing exactly what it's going to do, and the muscles are recruited, the blood flow changes, the focus changes, everything else gets zoned out. The student's already visualizing and maybe at a very high level in the brain, the neurons in the motor cortex are already firing and ready to go as they visualize what they're about to do. And then the buzzer goes off, and we merely execute that preordained skill set in isolation. Well, that never happens in the real world unless you're an assassin, right? Unless you're one of the very top military units that actually kicks the door in knowing that they're about to shoot somebody in a hostage rescue situation. Unless you're in one of those two, very rare, luckily, parts of the world, then you don't really know what's going to happen. And certainly when you're the average guy walking through the mall, or the average person carrying the groceries in from the car, or the person sitting on the couch and the front door gets kicked in, you don't have any briefing. So what you're forced to do is process information immediately prior to the execution of your skills, or even concurrently with the execution of your skills. For example, you don't know when you're going to stop shooting until the bad guy stops. There's no fire 3 shots to the chest on the buzzer. You fire shots until the bad guy stops. So we're forced to process information. So what we need to do on the range is force our students to process information prior to and immediately prior to, and then also during the execution of the complex motor skills. So we'll use relatively complex targets with lots of options, and we'll give commands that force the students to think. So for example, we might have a target with an X, target with a B, and then target with a G on it. And we'll say, the letter after Frank. Well, now the student has to think, okay, Frank, that's F, letter after that is G, the G's over here, and shoot that target. Now, sitting here on Google Chat, that doesn't seem that complicated, but when you add in some other stressors on the line, it can be. And even if it's not overly complicated, and the fact is their human brain has to take in a stimulus, process it, and then execute a motor skill based on what they just heard. So they couldn't have recruited the motor neurons, they couldn't have recruited the muscles, they couldn't have been visualizing exactly what they were going to do. And if we change things significantly, for example, maybe G was 30 feet away and the other 2 targets were 10 feet away, now they're really stuck because people obviously shoot at a different pace at 10 feet than they do at 30 feet. So they're even further removed. Maybe G is a 3-inch circle and the other 2 targets are 10-inch squares. Well, a 3-inch circle at a 15 feet is going to require sighted fire from the vast majority of shooters, but a 10-inch square at 15 feet probably wouldn't require sighted fire for a whole bunch of our students, 80, 90%. So now the actual skill sets that they're using could even be different based on a command we give. And then you add in like some of the new technology that's coming along with the Jedburgh target system, which allows us to not have a choreographed set number of shots. So you shoot until the target's down. You hit it twice, it might go down. You might hit it 9 times. And that variability is, again, something the students have to process during the shooting string of fire while they're executing the complex motor skills. So it's really dramatically removed from the old days of 2 to the body, 1 to the head, and just practicing it a million times and convincing yourself that you're good at something that matters.
So with how dynamic any potential gunfight or self-defense scenario could be, how do you instruct How do you instruct your students to prepare for situations like moving targets or obstacles or cover versus concealment or needing to run or any of the other infinite number of variables that could come into play during a self-defense encounter?
The first, if you look at our program from ICE training, we have. We start with a 2-day fundamental course. That 2-day course has been around for almost 11 years now, even going back, again, at the early developments of the concept started in the 90s. That program's been around forever. It's a very mature program. It continues to evolve. Every once in a while a student will make an observation or an instructor comes into the program that has a different perspective, or I'll see something or come up with something I'll try with students, and we'll evolve a drill or change an explanation. But that program's pretty mature. That 2-day program really is pretty straightforward, and it's pretty straightforward based on the probability. Like in the overwhelming majority of defensive shooting situations, there's no cover or concealment. There's a guy right there, he's trying to hurt you or someone you care to protect, and you deal with it. So whether you're not pieing the corner, you're not CQB situation, you're not an executive protection agent, you're not inside of a building that's getting attacked and the bad guys coming around the corner one way or another. It's not a crowd situation like the active shooter. The average defensive shooting is very straightforward. So that's what we focus on. We focus on the 86 the data that we use, very up-to-date current data, personal defense shootings, not just law enforcement or military term data. We know that well over 80%, almost 90% of the defensive shooting situations in this data set are occurring between 9 and 15 feet. So we start between 9 and 15 feet. We know that most of the time people have hands available, so we start with two-handed shooting. And from that point, we start based on reasonableness, based on plausibility, we start expanding. So in our day 3 and 4 formal training, our advanced pistol handling class, the follow-on course, CFS, that's where we start getting into things extreme distances. That's where we get into things like shooting around cover, shooting while drawing and presenting while you're on the ground, while you're in a car, while you're doing all those things, and that just adds to the variability. So we'll take that same balance of speed and precision drill model or the counter ambush model where they're processing commands, and we'll add in the skill sets of presenting while you're lying on your back. And they're really doing the same types of drills, they're just doing them in different body positions. So I think sometimes I look at course lists and like, we're going to do this, and 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 low light, and one-handed, and medical response, and behind cover, and under a car, and while seated, and on your back, and on your stomach, and on your side, and while kneeling, and these 80 bullet points. It's like, and then after lunch, we're going to do this other stuff. And it's like, well, what is happening here? If a 4-hour class, a one-day class, and you're trying to put all that stuff into a student's head, I think you're running an entertainment course all of a sudden. You're giving them a bunch of boxes to check, but where's the skill development? Where's the foundational principles? What's the justification for one-handed weekend reloads on day 1 of a defensive shooting course, for example? So I think a lot of that stuff, people overemphasize this checklist of things they've done as opposed to really developing the skills they're most likely to need.
Now, you had mentioned that you don't generally focus on the active shooter scenarios because that is a small portion of the self-defense situations that a self-defense encounter may take. But with all of the shootings that you hear about in the news that are really highly publicized in the media, I'm curious about your perspective as a firearms instructor. What are your thoughts of how we should talk to our kids about being safe at schools with a potential firearm situation where their safety is in question?
We started after Sandy Hook. I think I made a short kind of, well, that's a tragic thing kind of comment in the first 24 hours or so, publicly about the incident. Immediately, we started getting a lot of questions about what would you do, what do you suggest, kind of like you just said. It wasn't until about 2 days after the event I got a question. I think it was 2 days after the event. I got a question from a parent, and the question was much more specifically what you said there at the end, which was, what should I say to my kids? My kids are going to come home, and maybe it was earlier, because their whole point was the kids were going to watch this on the news. Their students, their friends were going to be talking about it. How should I, as someone who takes personal defense seriously, talk to my kids so that they're not scared, they realize this is rare, but they also have some sense of what to do? And I found that very compelling. And I wrote an article. It's in the blog archives at icetraining.info, and it was, what do you tell your kids after Sandy Hook? So I wrote this article, and I said all those things. These things are incredibly rare. The chances of them ever being involved are incredibly low, that when they go to school, they should be thinking about learning. But evil exists. You could be visited by that evil, and your school could be visited by it. So, here's some ideas. And that grew, the response to that article and some other instructors kind of asking about what we were going to do to help support the community and give people better options than hide and hope. Hide under a desk and hope the SWAT team shows up, the lockdown mentality. We started a program called School Attacker Response. So that the School Attacker Response course, you go to schoolattackerresponse.com or .org or all of them, just Google School Attacker Response or SARC, S-A-R-K, or S-A-R-C with my name, you'll find this program. And we started the program, and we get all for free. We wouldn't take expense money. We wouldn't take any money from anybody. We were traveling around talking to teachers, schools, and doing instructor development. So we had, I think, 5 instructor development courses, maybe 6, all across the country. So we did one in California, down in Florida. We did 2 in Ohio. There was another one somewhere along the way. I did seminars for schools in Ohio, New Jersey, Georgia, California, I think Florida. There were a bunch of them all over the place. We had a lot of we certified about 100 people to teach this program, all agreeing to do it for free and just put this information out there. And we had several schools that integrated concepts from the program. And the program basically came down to three pretty simple concepts. Evade, barricade, and respond. Get away. If you can get the kids out of the, if the shooting's happening in the hallway, get the kids out of the room and let them run. Get them out of the window and let them run if they're on the first floor. Get them off the campus. Concentrating kids in these kill zones is just foolish. The only kids that survived one of the rooms in Sandy Hook, as soon as the door opened, a bunch of kids, 4 or 5, 6 kids, bolted past the gunman and left the room. Those survived. They left the room, left the hallway, they left the school, they left the campus, and they went and hid at a local house. And for a while, they were found there. They were the only kids that survived unscathed from that particular room. You know, if you're not where the bad guy is, you're not going to get hurt. So get away. If you can't get away, barricade. And better ways to barricade than just the door. So that's really a teacher and institutional issue, is how do we keep the bad guy from getting to us once we're hidden. And then the last part is respond, and that's the part that's always been missing. Now, luckily, in the last year, many programs have sprung up around the country that advocate a response now, instead of just hiding and waiting for the heroes, the SWAT guys, to show up. So we're not the only program at all, but there are a lot of programs out there now that advise, grab the scissors, grab the fire extinguisher, pick up the desk, put your backpack on backwards, fill it with books, swarm the guy, grab the gun, whatever you can do to hurt and affect the bad guy. In a room full of 20 10-year-olds can cause a bad guy trouble in terms of him trying to shoot them. Certainly with a teacher there leading the way, and you put a sixth grader in there or a 7th grader in there, you put a high school team together, and a thing with the proper motivation, the proper mindset. Columbine never happens, right? Or it may start, but it certainly doesn't go as far as it did when you got a school full of high school athletes and basically adult-sized people with lots of things around to bash 2 crazy gunmen with. You can stop that a lot faster. We try to take away the myth of the gun as a magic tool of doom. We take away the power of evil, intimidation, and we empower people to act. I honestly believe if we started telling kids at a young age to stand up against an armed gunman, like the kid that's 3 inches taller than you isn't really going to get away with being a bully on the playground if you've been told your personal defense is your responsibility. You tell a girl from the age of 6 years old that she's supposed to stand up to a crazy person with a semi-automatic rifle shooting up school. How does she stand for getting smacked by her husband when she's 20 years old? We empower people to stand up to violence and through preaching self-defense and personal defense as an individual responsibility, not just a right. I think we change society. So I'm all for any program in any school that tells kids they may need to fight back and it's appropriate to do so.
Speaking of changing society, I really thought that you touched on something interesting, because with all of this, all these stories that have been in the media, there have been a lot of political responses, and some on one end of a spectrum or the other. I imagine you meet lots and lots of people through training and teaching. How do you approach your training as far as whether you're apolitical, or do you think that because you are a firearms instructor that influences the way that you look at these kinds of social issues?
I'm socially very liberal, so I'm fiscally conservative. Obviously, I'm pro-gun. When it comes to international relations, I think I side with a much more conservative viewpoint. But as far as like I don't even know why people why is gay marriage a conversation that anyone's having? I don't know. Why it's ridiculous. Legal pot in Colorado. Okay, I'm not smoking pot. I was in Colorado for 2 weeks this year. The only time I smelled pot was when I was at Red Rocks at an open air concert, which is pretty par for the course of every open air concert I've been to in 40 states for my entire life since high school. So the very it's, up in the mountains, and over in Denver, and it's just the idea that goes on, the idea that somebody's concerned about the color of someone's skin in regard to coming to a shooting class, like I don't even compute. So I guess I'm pretty apolitical as far as who comes to my classes, who I'm teaching for, all of that stuff. Gun owners, I get it. Like there are gun owners, a lot of them who voted for Obama. I didn't vote for Obama, but I'm not going to suggest that someone who's a gun owner who did vote for Obama somehow is not a real gun owner and not welcome in my class. So apolitical in the sense of anti-ignorance, that someone's political views outside of gun ownership don't affect gun ownership. And I see way too many people, certainly on our side. I don't really see it that much on the anti-gun side, but I see a lot of people on our side who try to tie guns to a whole bunch of other political issues. And if I saw a picture of somebody standing in front of a Hobby Lobby holding a Chick-fil-A bag with a AK-47, like somehow those things are all related in their world, and I don't get that.
Well, personally, I guess I have a little bit more of or somewhat of a libertarian outlook on things. So I guess for me, the way I look, that expands to the way I look at firearms. As long as my rights to own a firearm, if I'm not using it to impede anyone else's rights to live and enjoy their lives, I don't see why it should be someone else's decision why I should be allowed to have X amount of guns or take whatever training I want to take. So I was curious about your perspective, coming, seeing that you meet so many different people, and you have more of that media presence. And actually, I had a question about your media presence, a little bit different train of thought, but I've been in martial arts basically my whole life, and I saw a little article online not too long ago regarding knife defense. Would you tell us a little bit more about your martial arts experience and how that ties into your firearms training?
The course defense against the knife.
Oh, did I lose you? All of a sudden your audio completely dropped.
That
Oh no! Oh, it says you're
magazine.
still on the chat.
I think I'm here.
Oh, no, okay, now you're back.
Yes,
I missed
no?
whatever it was you just said, but I think you're good now.
Okay, so
Yep, we're good.
good. Were you talking about the Black Belt magazine stuff?
Yes, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, so we did. We talked about close quarters defense against a knife. So my connections with it was actually Mike Janich, a great knife instructor, defense with a knife as opposed to defense from a knife instructor. We were working together on the Best Defense TV show, and he was voted in as the weapons instructor of the year for Black Belt magazine. And I think it was 2009 or 2010, must have been 2009. So he made the connection in the introduction to some of the people at Black Belt magazine to get them to come out. They were interested in gun training. So the editor of Black Belt magazine actually came out and took a combat-focused shooting course. And it really resonated with him. He liked it. He wanted to share the information with the readers of Black Belt magazine. He's of the opinion that the use of a firearm is a martial art. I agree with him. And I have a very sporadic martial arts background. I've never had the kind of mental discipline or really been in one place long enough to go through any art to any high belt level or anything like that. But I've certainly dabbled in a lot and trained in a lot of personal defense, unarmed defense. So it eventually, after the first article and the response to the first article, they ended up on the cover of Black Belt magazine to do this close quarters gun thing. And it was the first time, I was quite honored, obviously, it was the first time a firearms guy was on the cover of Black Belt magazine. And again, the editor made the argument that martial arts includes the use of a gun. And we were talking about defense against any contact weapon in extreme close quarters. If you go back to about 2000, 1999, 2000, somewhere in there, was the first time that I ever ran a extreme close quarters defense session that involved like grappling and striking and wrestling and fighting and control techniques and guns. And it was a SWAT team training session. and that evolved to our extreme close quarters tactics program. And by 2004, we were running an extreme close quarters counter ambush program for high-level military units, military special operations guys, especially in the Army and Navy for the most part. And we ran that program for years. 2004, 2008, we had hundreds and hundreds of guys go through there. Dozens of teams took the course, and it was great. It was awesome. It's really a passion of mine, that extreme close quarters problem. And we ran the program off and on in the private sector as an open enrollment course. And we actually just started bringing it back in a strong way really last year. And this year, I had, in June, I ran 3 of the courses. June and July, we ran 3. We ran one in Minneapolis, one in Michigan, and one in Oregon. And we had a great mix of military, law enforcement, and civilian guys. And I think the problem that a lot of people run into is that contact shooting or retention shooting has really been oversimplified on the range because, quite frankly, I think a lot of the first generation and second generation instructors in firearms world really had no practical fighting in contact background. And so to them, the solution was, how do I shoot the gun while it's up against my body while I'm touching somebody? But things like the shove and shoot or the speed rock, like, they don't take anything into account in terms of the actual dynamics of a physical fight. If someone actually on you trying to hurt you, or with a tool trying to stab you, or their gun trying to point at you that you have to control. So early on we had this concept of clear, control, and counter. So you clear the knife from immediate threat to you, or get yourself out of the way, control the knife, and then once you've controlled their tool, that's when you start thinking about getting to your defensive firearm and using it while in contact. In the meantime, there was some parallel development. A guy named Craig Douglas, his company ShivWorks, he came out of the law enforcement side, and he was teaching an extreme close quarters program as well that involved grappling and guns and fighting and striking and getting to your gun and controlling the bad guy's gun. And we became friends, I don't know, probably around 2008. We started talking and became really good friends and kind of compared a bunch of notes. He's one of the only guys in the industry who really does extreme close quarters as a specialty full-time, integrating grappling and guns and striking. So he's got a great program called Extreme Close Quarters Concepts, and several people have taken his course and taken our Extreme Close Quarters Tactics, and said that they're similar but different, and they cover overlapping areas, but they also cover some stuff. So I think we're the only 2 guys really in the industry that are covering that material in the way that we do, involving blocks on sessions on the unarmed parts and the armed parts, and then putting them all together in some very dynamic, aggressive, assertive, kind of full speed, full contact scenarios with sim guns. So that's what that article was all about. It was kind of taking the lessons we've learned from observing fights and observing simulated fights and teaching these classes and putting it all together and letting people understand that it's not as simple as just pulling the gun out, keeping it up against your body, and firing twice while a piece of paper stands, a foot from you and doesn't really do anything. That in-contact moment is pretty dynamic and much more challenging than I think most people give it credit for. So we really emphasize that there's no reason to stand on a range and shoot a piece of paper without being able to put it into context. And when you're within 2 arms reach, the context is much more physical than a lot of people have trained.
I just wanted to take a second to thank you, first of all, for providing so much information to myself and my viewers. You are very articulate, very well spoken. I can tell you spent a lot of time training, and you have really great ways of communicating that danger and that need to train for realistic situations instead of getting it stuck into these like rote habits and static target shooting situations. So thank you for sharing your experience with my viewers. And I do have more questions if you are willing to stay a little bit longer. I know we've already run a little later than we intended.
10 o'clock in the morning, so I'm here until then.
All right. Well, I had a question about that shoot or no shoot decision, because you mentioned that earlier in the conversation. We had first started chatting a little bit about your approach to sight and no sight shooting, and evolved from there. How do you instruct your students to make that decision, to recognize, okay, this is a time where I need to make that decision to fire, or no, I'll find another way, or I'll escape, or find a different solution to this self-defense scenario?
again, I think the sort of let's go back when I was in the police academy or when I was learning the kind of traditional private sector approach. There's like this chart, right? It's like, well, let's see, does he have checklist? Does he have opportunity? Does he have the intent? All these things. That's all the traditional approaches, right? And if he meets all the criteria, then would a reasonable person under these circumstances, you just got stabbed in the face, like stop, right? Like what you're not doing a cross-reference chart checklist in the middle. If you're doing all that, you obviously don't need to defend yourself. So don't defend yourself. If you're actually doing all those checklists in your head, you're not under immediate lethal threat, and you don't need to shoot anybody. And I think that's the lesson that I've come away with from all the stuff that I've seen and studied and researched and talked to people who've been in fights and had to defend themselves and people that were ambushed, as opposed to people who went hunting for bad guys. The military guys, very rarely in SWAT situations. There's some law enforcement situations that sort of cross the line where there's a potential threat ahead of you, but you've had 100 potential threats in front of you, so you don't really think you're going to have to shoot somebody, but you're kind of more ready than you are when you're sitting in the Wendy's. But it mentally, not really. Physically, the gun's in your hand, but mentally, you can still be ambushed. And I think, again, we go back to that counter-ambush idea. We don't talk about the legal schematic. Now, let me just caveat that and say, obviously, it's incredibly important that people understand the laws regarding use of force, wherever they are, and the laws carrying a gun and all that stuff. So having said all that, in the moment when the bad guy shows up and points the gun at you, there's no calculation being made. Like, there's a guy threatening your life, and if you don't you'll recognize that as a human being, especially the human being who's taking the time, effort, and energy to wear the gun and get the training and do the preparation. So I think we spend an awful lot of time, like the whole thing where like two targets turn at you at the same time, and one has a banana and the other one has a pistol, and you have to figure out which one to shoot. That is just some range craziness. Like, what situation are you in where two guys spin on you at the same time and one has a banana? Like, that doesn't happen. So it's just so contrived, right? When a guy shows up and says, I got you, and it's a banana, you go, and then you're like, hey, jackass, stop pointing that banana at me. When a guy shows up and points a gun at you, you go, and then you react accordingly. Is he within 2 arms reach? Can you get behind cover? Do you draw your gun? There's a variation from the moment you realize you're in a fight, but I think it's real easy to figure out that you're in a fight, and if you need to defend yourself with a gun, then you do it. And we talk about should versus could, right? The home defense situation. So my other recent book that came out just in May is Defend Yourself. So Defend Yourself is a book on armed home defense. That book just came out, and we talk a lot in there about evading and barricading and communicating with the police. I don't care about castle doctrine in the sense of teaching tactics. Castle doctrine is important to understand from a legal standpoint and to articulate why you did what you did and for the aftermath of a fight. But in the moment of the fight, if you're standing in your living room while there's a guy with an axe chopping through your door, and you're just sitting there waiting on the phone calmly, like, okay, hey, 911, there's a guy with an axe. I'm in my living room. If he comes in here, I'm going to shoot him. And the minute he puts his foot across the threshold of your domicile, you shoot him 3 times in the chest. There's something wrong with you. Like, why are you standing in the living room while the guy's chopping your door down when you could be 2 corners away? You could be upstairs. You could be in the basement. You could be behind another barricaded door putting furniture in front of it, avoiding the need to ever shoot anybody. Like, you're not, like, that's one of the things, like, actually I regret in some ways, like when I rewrite that book, and from now on, I've been talking a lot about personal defense inside the home as opposed to home defense. You're not defending your home. You're not keeping someone from setting foot across the threshold. You're yourself or your family while inside of your home, making plans and planning your tactics and your strategies appropriately. So I am a huge advocate of, obviously, being prepared to defend yourself. I'm not a huge advocate in saying I'm allowed to stand in my living room and shoot that guy as long as I say I was in fear of my life and he's in my home. The law says I can. Well, if you can go hide in your bedroom, I think you're making a better choice rather than standing in the living room and exposing yourself to, more danger. Now obviously there's caveats. If your family's spread out all over the house and you can't get them all together, or your wife's trying to get them together, or your husband's trying to get them all together, or you're standing in the living room kind of on guard to defend them, then that's something completely different. But I think there's a lot of, and a lot of it's just internet, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of that whole, I have to retreat, so I'm not going to. Well, you don't have to retreat, but maybe you should, right? So it's should versus could for me.
That brought up another question for me. So say you were in one of those scenarios, you're defending yourself in your home, and you have to take that action where you have to fire on a bad guy. What do you do then? The bad guy has stopped. You're standing there. You just dispatched him. What happens?
Well,
Your blood's
obviously,
pumping, and you're
if the police
scared.
aren't already on
Got
the
a gun
way,
in your hand.
well, if the police aren't already on the way, we get the police on the way. That's going to be the first thing. Well, I take it back. Maybe the first thing is we are going to assess the environment, right? We're going to make sure there's no other threats, make sure our family doesn't need any medical attention, top the gun off if we have another magazine, put ourselves in a safe position, keep an eye on the bad guy and make sure he's really out of the fight, all that stuff, all the tactical stuff, right? And all the medical stuff. Then we're going to make sure the police are on the way if they're not already. It certainly doesn't hurt to call an ambulance. That's definitely, there's this issue of, well, liability-wise, it's going to look better in civil court if you call an ambulance. Maybe, but how about like human being-wise, it's a good idea to call the ambulance, right? So we got that going on. Don't approach the bad guy. You need to secure the bad guy. You don't need to secure his knife. You don't need to secure his gun. Leave it there. Leave the evidence where it is. Like, don't mess with it, right? If he reaches for it again, shame on him. He's going to get shot again. But you don't need to get within arm's reach. You don't need to touch it. You don't need to contaminate the evidence. You don't need to go do anything. Stay away from the bad guy. Stay away from the bad guy tools. Watch him and wait for the police to get there. And then number one common sense thing I would hope is not to get shot by the police, right? Police show up, get your gun in the holster, put your gun on the ground, like get your hands up. The police are in charge. Consider, yield, comply, whatever you want to do. To secure the environment, and they did knock it off. So you have not gotten killed by the bad guy, and you've not gotten shot by the police. Your next job is to not get arrested. So we advise people to tell police the facts that led to the need for defense. So there's the bad guy. He kicked in the door. There's the splintered lock. There's the gun he fired at me. There's the bullet holes in the wall. Here's the knife. There's the knife, and here's the slash in my arm where he cut me. He put me in a position where I needed to defend myself. Those kind of details, the evidence of the crime, are important.
Uh-oh, did I lose connection again? Oh man, audio and video completely just dropped. So if you're still on, I have no idea what you just said.
No.
Oh, it says you're still connected. Yay, more technical difficulties. Fantastic.
Hello?
Okay, there you are. You're back again.
Okay.
Oh, crud. Now he's completely gone. Buckets! Alright, hold on. Let me see if he is going to rejoin. Sorry for the technical difficulties, guys.
I don't know what's going on right now. I got nothing.
Okay, my microphone randomly muted when you rejoined, so I was like, oh, okay, I guess nobody can hear me. Cool. Well, welcome back. Sorry about that.
I
Hotel
don't know when I
internet's
cut
not
out.
always.
So,
Go on.
yeah, hotel internet's not awesome. So, I think I was talking about dealing with police and just the idea that your job is to not get arrested. You have to convey the information to police so they know not to arrest you, because if there's bullets in the bad guy and there's less bullets in your gun, you did meet the elements of the crime of murder if the guy's dead. So, that homicide charge needs to not be made based on the extenuating circumstances and the concept of the less greater good. If the greater good are excused from the crime of murder, if you just say, I'm not saying a word, here's my lawyer's card, the officer is not to have any choice but to arrest you. Right? On the other hand, if you present the officers with all the extenuating circumstances, then there's that hope that you're not going to be arrested. And then they follow the last piece of the minute you are charged, the minute you are told you're being arrested for a crime, talking, and that's when you're going to need to consult with a lawyer. At that point, but before you're arrested, certainly at least happen, to me, makes a lot of sense. Talking about the details of how many rounds you fired and all that kind of stuff, probably not the best idea. Talking about what the bad guy did to put you in a position of needing to shoot, I think that's a really good idea. And again, a home defense, that's all that stuff is covered in the Defend Yourself book, including the immediate aftermath.
So that reminds me, I read an article on Gun Nuts by Caleb pretty recently, and he mentioned the topic of if you're in a self-defense situation and you and your aggressor break contact, what do you do from there? Because you're still worried, you're running, they might be still around, you may have your firearm drawn. What do you recommend to do in that situation?
Well, I think a lot depends on the circumstances, right? If the bad guy runs away, is that the scenario?
Yeah, the question was more like, do you chase after them at that point because you want to dispatch them, or do you run away to try and keep as much distance between you and them as possible?
Well, I didn't read the article, and certainly if the question that sometimes people pose questions just to get a lot of hits on the internet, I guess, there's no question that you don't chase after bad guys. Like, that's not a thing, right? Unless you have flashy red and blue lights, you don't go chase after bad guys. It's not your job. So if the bad guy runs away or falls down and you can get away, you get away, and you take your family with you, obviously. If a lot of times I do these critiques, like I was on the show Stop the Threat a lot, and the Stop the Threat has reenactments of actual crimes. And in a lot of these crimes, and we see it a lot on the internet, and we see it a lot in the newspaper, where the grocery store clerk is robbed. They pull out a gun. The bad guy runs out of the store, and they chase him into the parking lot. And it's like, why are you doing that? This makes no sense. Now, why you're doing it is human behavior. You've been threatened. You've been insulted. You've got ego investment. Now the bad guy's running. Now you're like the dog on the porch when the squirrel goes by. You're like, oh, squirrel, and you go run after it. Where the trick is ahead of time to intellectually, without emotion involved, you train yourself, you make your plan that if the bad guy runs away, I don't chase the bad guy. That's not my job. A good friend of mine was killed chasing bad guys as a cop, chasing bad guys around corners and stuff. And it happens every year. Unfortunately, these foot pursuits that lead to seriously injured because the bad guys get around the next corner, waiting for the cop to blindly run around the corner, which is, they know better, The average person needs to know better too. You don't chase the bad guy. You don't go clear your house. Once a week I've got a student that wants information on somebody on the internet about clearing their house. I've worked with the highest level military teams on the planet, and they make mistakes as teams trying to clear a house. But you've watched some YouTube, so you're going to go clear your house to make sure your wife and kids are safe. It's ludicrous. If you really have any reason to believe that there's bad guys in your house, you get all your kids behind you, and you lock the door, and you call the police, and you wait for bed. You let the police show up. I mean, the local police are not miss the bad guy. They have to. So this idea of checking around the house, right? I mean, how many times have I been at a dinner party and somebody's told me about the time they heard some noise outside, so they grabbed their grandfather's duck gun and went out to check it out. And these people will admit in mid-story, I don't know what I would do if I'd have found him. Well, no shit. So don't go outside looking for bad guys. You know, stay safe, and certainly don't go chase bad guys once you've solved the problem. Let the bad guy run away. Call the police. Give them a good description.
I happen to think that's excellent advice, as I know I am definitely not qualified to be dealing with that kind of situation. I don't want to if I don't absolutely have to. But one thing that you mentioned in that in your response there that was intriguing to me was that mention of like the ego and the emotions involved. I've definitely seen, not just in training, but just in people in general, when you have an emotional response to either a danger situation or just maybe somebody getting threatening all up in your face, how do you separate that emotional response? Maybe some dude just punched you in the face. It's really difficult if you're in that kind of situation not to get mad or want to retaliate or something. And when you have that firearm, it escalates the situation. So I was curious to hear how you approach that with your training perspective.
So it really does come down to discipline, to having a plan and sticking to the plan, to not kind of buying into the ego thing. You know, there's nothing cooler in a lot of ways than being like cool and just smooth, and somebody being completely ridiculous and over the top and insulting, and maybe there was even a low-level physical contact, you know, because you, pulled into the wrong parking spot, because you bumped into somebody in a bar, because you had a lingering, you know, complimentary look at some guy's girlfriend, whatever the thing is, like, that guy wants to go crazy, and you're like, hey, all right, well, my bad, I'll buy you a beer. Like that, to me, is like the better way to go, you know, my bad, I'll move my car. Why... Like putting yourself at risk, putting your livelihood at risk because you may be out of work, putting your family at risk because somebody's going to want to escalate and retaliate over you beating some guy's ass in a parking lot. Like, I don't even understand that logic anymore. Now granted, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, that may have been something I would more easily justify. You know, well, we need to stand up to this, and we need to make sure. If you're just cool and you're just like, hey, you know what? You don't need to be mad about this, and I don't need to be mad about this, and it's good. Like, that's not letting somebody get. You're not running away. You're not cowering in fear. You're not letting the bad guy win to just like tell somebody, hey, no harm, no foul, and trying to convey that to guys, especially guys, because women, like that doesn't happen as much. I think like the scale factor of what could be a fight for guys, I think is it's much easier to be at a 9 and pull back as a guy. Like there's all that bravado, you know, sometimes testosterone, sometimes alcohol fueled. There's a lot of like 9.5s that could go either way, and then there isn't a fight as long as one guy doesn't really want there to be a fight, right? When I teach a women's assault prevention course, I'd much rather see a woman in a physical intimidation moment. When it's like it's like a 7, and she thinks that she's gonna have to defend herself from a guy, I would much rather see her jump to a 10 and start, you know, either getting out or getting assertive. Because the victimization between a male and female in an assault situation is usually the dynamics very, very different, right? You don't, like, a guy doesn't posture against a woman. If a guy is physically touching, assaulting a woman, that's usually not posturing. That's a precursor to either compliance or an escalation of force. So the need to defend yourself is much more obvious in black and white there. Guys posture. So in the face of that, I think it's much easier to tone it down and be the person who says, you know what, it's not worth fighting over, dude. Like, I get it, posture, but hey, not right now. There's not going to be a fight, and just kind of disciplining yourself to know that. So take that now to the bad guy who's again the guy who's kicking your door in. Go back to what we talked about earlier. That's a great insult. It's intimidation. It's bullying. It's violence. It's a threat. It's all of these things. But you got to look at the bigger picture. 3 weeks from now, it's going to be a lot better if you barricade yourself in your bedroom with your kids behind you and the police show up and arrest this guy than if you're standing in the living room over the guy's bloody dead body because you just waited there until he finally kicked in the door and was tired and shot him because the law says you can, because you can articulate that he was aggressing you in your domicile, right? So I think that the discipline to say avoid confrontation at all levels, avoid needing to fight when you can, I think that's really important. But it has to start now. It has to start in a sort of clear-headed, intellectual moment. In the middle of the fight, you're not likely to make that decision. In the middle of the threatening moment, you're not likely to go in that direction unless you've really planned to avoid conflict whenever possible.
No, that is an awesome point. One thing you mentioned was about how guys are more likely to be get up to that 9 or 9.5 for bravado or testosterone or whatever. And I had that thought. I was curious. Does that male perspective, that male attitude, have an effect on how you teach female courses or courses with largely female students versus courses with mixed or largely male students? Does that play a role? Because I've seen some guys and some ladies have different learning approaches at the range, but I don't have your experience with it.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to gun stuff, if we're just talking about like the combat focus shooting program, when it comes to gun stuff, women's only courses are marketing. That's a marketing thing. If I have a hostess, I guess, that wants to have a women's only class or a range that wants to run a women's only class, cool, I'll teach a women's only class. We've done a lot of women's only press events, things like that, with female members of the media. There's a time and a place for that. But to insinuate that the material is different is a great disservice to the material and to the women. It's condescending and it's pandering. The shooting a gun is, as a human animal integrating with a mechanical tool, hand size, strength, coordination, dexterity, the ranges among females, yeah, I get it. Women generally have less upper body strength. Women generally have smaller hands. But that doesn't mean that in any given class I might not have a woman whose hands are bigger than the smallest handed guy and a woman who is upper body stronger than the weakest guy in the class. And that happens, not when women are in the class, where there was classes on their taught. There's a lot of marketing value to saying this is a women's only class taught by women for women, but at the end of the day, the skill set should be the same. Now, the context could be very different. In other words, body, where you're carrying on your body. Obviously, off-body carry, first carry is more popular with women. But more and more, I'm seeing women, get really comfortable with the appendix carry position because of the way women dress and the way women's bodies are built. Appendix carry works really well for a lot of women, especially with tighter jeans and shirts that'll drape over the front area of the jeans, the stomach area where the gun can be carried. No belts, so we're seeing a lot of belly band carry, stuff like that. So I think the important message to women that are interested in this is go join a class. In fact, the update that's going to come out Monday, the Personal Defense Network Training Tour update that we taped in New Jersey just earlier this week, features a woman in the class who's in the firearms industry. She's a firearms retailer. She's worked in the store for 5 or 6 years but never taken a formal class. And she took a class where she was the only woman. And she said at first she had a little trepidation about it, but ultimately she's so glad she did it. And I think that messaging is really important because there are only so many women's only classes you're going to fill in the industry that is 98% men, right? So waiting around for a women's only class is only means that you're going to not get to train as often, or maybe not get to train at all because there's no women's only classes in your town, or unfortunately a lot of the women's only classes are these very low level kind of get to know the gun classes, not the higher level defensive classes. So that's an important piece of messaging, I think, and I'm sure you have a lot of women in your audience that have seen both options, the women in the men's class, quote unquote, and the women's only class. Well, I run classes for human beings. I don't run classes for just cops. I don't run classes for just military. I don't run classes for just CCW, for just dentists, for just women, whatever. Like most of our classes are open enrollment. Sign up, show up, do the work, you'll get the material. That's very different from non-gun classes. In our non-gun classes, our women's assault prevention courses, like I don't teach unarmed defense for men. I'm of the opinion that overwhelmingly men are in a much better position, like I was talking about earlier, to avoid conflict and to not let their emotions drag them into fights. With male-on-male fights are much more often, unarmed fights are much more often what would be called equal initiative. The violence against women is not nearly as often equal initiative. It's much more often a predatory action from a man. So we teach that course very differently in terms of trusting your intuition, how quickly you escalate to use of violence, use of force, use of your natural tools to defend yourself, and obviously a lot of verbal, assertive, like clear messaging is important too. Clear decision making is important for women. I was part of the foundation of the Wrong Woman program that's run by Kelly Muir, and I still teach my courses. My women's assault prevention courses are branded under the Wrong Woman program. I think her approach, her comprehensive and holistic approach to all the things from decision making to unarmed skills to defensive tools like taser, pepper spray, and of course firearms is spot on. So that program is still sort of the core of what I teach when it comes to unarmed defense. And you can find a lot of that information at personaldefensenetwork.com. We have a lot of women-specific information when it comes to the unarmed defense or obviously assault prevention.
Well, I'd have to say that I really like that answer, partly because from my own perspective, with what I do with my channel on the website that I manage, I'd rather be recognized as a shooter rather than like a female. Not that I'm not, feminine and don't include, things related to that in my material or my videos or articles, but when I am looking at the firearms sport, that's part of what drew me to it at first, was because unlike my 17, 18 years of martial arts experience, I recognize that I have different limitations when it comes to sparring off, going toe-to-toe with a guy who's maybe, 6'4" and 350 pounds. There's only so much I could do. But with firearms, that really helps kind of level the playing field.
6'4", 320 pounds.
So I didn't catch that last bit.
There's only so much I can do against the guy who's 6'3", 300 too, right? And I think that's what gets lost in the translations. If we look at apples to apples, there's plenty of guys out there that would need to escalate to a defensive tool against a large, skilled predator.
Definitely. And I think that too often, maybe because females are less common in the sport, which I like to see, the growth that I have seen over the last few years. I think that may be part of the perception that women need their own specific approach. But I personally prefer a training approach where I'm taking the exact same courses as guys and I'm expected to perform to the exact same standard. I don't like the idea that, well, you're a woman, you should be in a special class because, you can't really learn from a guy, or whatever the marketing implication would be to have a woman's only armed defense course. But I also think that is an important distinction, like you made, that, well, unarmed is a completely different realm.
Yeah, there's also a lot of the conversation in context. The mixed company doesn't always work in the women's assault prevention course, just because we have a lot of questions and contexts that are very, very specific to attacks against women that just don't apply to guys. So having an open enrollment unarmed defense course, you're kind of limited to technique and tactic as opposed to context. And I think that for conflict avoidance, which is obviously the better choice, so much of the trusting your intuition and verbal communication and boundary setting and avoiding isolation, avoiding extra access, controlling who how much trust somebody's given, all of those things apply to a women's assault prevention class in ways that really don't even come up if you're teaching a guy self-defense.
Well, for one thing, I wanted to thank you for dealing with all of our technical difficulties. And for those of my viewers who maybe are less familiar with you, I know you mentioned that you came out with a book just in May. What kind of resources are out there that they can go to learn more about your training methods or your programs or your schooling?
ICEtraining.us is the primary website. That's where all the courses, they can go links to the store for all the books and the DVDs and all that kind of stuff. If you go to also the blog with all the articles there, announcements there. But the best resource that people can get from me online is personaldefensenetwork.com. Personaldefensenetwork.com has, I don't know, 200 or something videos, another few score articles. We've been collecting information and distributing it online since 2010 for PDN, but PDN is a sister project to our DVD series that we launched in 2005. And that DVD series now has about 80 we've been producing about 12 to 15 DVDs a year. We've shipped about 6.5 million of them since 2005. The NRA is obviously our biggest partner on that. They've been distributing the DVDs for us to members on a continuity basis. So you get one DVD, you get the next one a month later, a month later, a month later. And we have so many people that have contributed to it. It's not 80 DVDs with me. All of the contributors at Personal Defense Network. We've got about 40 different people who've done DVDs and articles and videos. I mentioned Kelly Muir with some of her women's assault prevention stuff, and we've got Grant Cunningham in there, Alessandro Padavane, Mike Janich is in there, Craig Douglas, who I mentioned earlier, is there, Omari Broussard, Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, Marty Hayes with some legal information we talked about. I mean, almost every topic we've talked about, I've covered or we've had outside experts come in and cover in our DVD series, and we source a lot of those video clips for the website from those DVDs. So we've got a premium members area where there's extra information and full streaming DVDs for $30 a year, about the price of one DVD. You can get access to all that stuff in the premium area too, but literally hundreds of videos for free at personaldefensenetwork.com. That's the best place to go to follow up on any we've talked about. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook about 12 times on different pages and things. I'm very accessible on the internet. Obviously, I saw your article and got in touch with you, and here we are doing a Google chat. I love doing these things. I'm always in a hotel room, so we did one with the shooter's mindset, and I think that's where we coined the term. This is tactical pillow talk with Rob, because there's always like a hotel bed in the background of the shot or something. I
noticed you travel a ton.
I'm literally homeless right now, which I've done a few times. Everything's just on the road and all hotels all the time. I'm driving up to Alaska next week for a course. There's just a lot of constant motion. There's a lot of opportunities to share information with people. That's what I want to do. We put out all this information. If 10 people get something out of it, awesome. If one person buys a book off the website, bonus. It's maybe somebody ends up taking a class because of what we've talked about tonight. Maybe one of my classes, maybe somebody else's classes. It doesn't really matter. It's about putting the information out, and from that, the business succeeds. But the mission is to put out information. So hit me up on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Find me on email. If you have a question, let me know.
Or maybe with all the traveling you do, I'm sure it'll be pretty easy for somebody to bump into you. Do you ever do anything for fun? Are you ever home, or are you just like traveling 365?
No, I'm literally homeless.
That's crazy.
Address right now. The I'm probably my company's based in Florida, in Jacksonville, and I'm probably going to establish a residency in Florida here this fall after I'm done with the tour. But the fact is, I mean, I have fun almost daily. There's a moment of just enjoying friends, enjoying time with students. And tonight, I taught a class. We had an awesome class at Gander Mountain Academy broadcast class. And technically, I taught in 6 locations today in 5 states with a network team of instructors where we broadcast my lectures, and in between each lecture block, we all take our groups to the range and we come back together. So, and I taught literally nationwide with a great team to a whole bunch of students all over the country. And then I went and had sushi with a good friend of mine, Ken Murray, who's also a Personal Defense Network contributor. He's like the godfather of reality-based training. He's one of the developers of Simunitions, the author of Training at the Speed of Life, the founder of the Reality-Based Training Association. We went together with the manager of the local Gander Mountain Academy and one of our students who's been through several classes and he's become a friend. So, you know, I taught all day. I go have sushi, have a little sake. I come back to the hotel. We have a great chat. We share a bunch of information with people like that. How am I going to have a much better day of work? You know. And
so I
next
hear
week
you
when I'm
don't
up in
drink
Alaska, I'm going to have a few days off, and I'm just. No, I don't drink warm sake. I don't. Warm sake is like, it's like a malt liquor beverage. It's not really what. No, it's not good. There's a world of delicious cold sakes out there. You've got filtered sakes and unfiltered sakes. And sake is what wine. It's as varied as the world of reds and whites. So yeah, there's a lot of good sake out there. None of it's warm.
Okay, maybe I'm just a little tiny bit biased. But it's been a real pleasure having you on my first episode, even with the issues that we've had. So thank you again for taking the time and sharing your experience.
Sure.
And I'm definitely have found even more of your material to be interested in. I was especially interested in that article that you referenced earlier about how to talk to your kids after Sandy Hook. I'm definitely going to have to look into that. But well, I think I'm just gonna wrap this up for my first episode of GunGeeks Live. And thank you again.
Great.
It's been a really informative show.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for the opportunity.